Well, top White House officials are in Israel tonight working to keep President Trump's peace plan on track. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and senior White House advisor Jared Kushner met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today. The talks come after a violent weekend that threatened the fragile ceasefire in the region. On Sunday, Israel accused Hamas of killing 2 soldiers. In response, Israel launched airstrikes in Rafah. Despite the flare-up, Israel says the ceasefire is still holding. They've also pledged to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. The next phase of the peace deal is expected to include Israel pulling back from parts of Gaza and efforts to disarm Hamas. President Trump told Fox News, though, there's no timeline to disarm the terror group.
Not a timeline, not a hard line, but we're going to see how it all works out. They've lived there for a long time. They're very violent. As you understand, you've been covering it for a long time, but we're going to find out. So it's not a hard timeline, but it's a line in my own mind. And at a certain point, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then we'll have to do it for them.
Hamas says it has no plans to disarm despite mounting international pressure. At the same time, reports are growing that Hamas is clashing with rival groups inside Gaza, even executing civilians accused of cooperating with Israel. And now another major test for the ceasefire. Israel is still waiting for Hamas to return the bodies of the remaining deceased hostages. More are expected to be returned later this week. Well, for more, let's bring in our panel. Natalie Ecanow, senior research analyst at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and CBN senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright. Kelly, I'd like to start with you. What is the White House's goal? What are they hoping to achieve by sending Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff back to Israel? And is this potentially a sign of growing concern that the ceasefire and the broader peace plan may be unraveling?
So look, there are concerns, John, good evening to you, by the way, but there are concerns within the Trump administration to make sure that they can hold the line on this very fragile ceasefire in the Middle East. Hamas, it continues to show its true colors in helping and being held bent on disrupting the deal by conducting violent attacks, as you talked about, on Israeli defense forces. Over the weekend, Trump said that hopefully there will be a little less violence going forward. But even today, John, he mentioned that the Vice President of the United States will be going there tomorrow. The Vice President is expected to meet with various leaders in Israel, as well as visit the command center that's in charge of overseeing this fragile ceasefire. And then there are reports that he may even go to Gaza. But here's the bottom line. If Hamas is not good on following with their plans, for example, in actually turning over all of the hostages. There are 16 dead hostages that still remain to be sent back to their homeland in Israel. That is part of phase 1. Phase 2 is for Hamas to totally disarm, and that is something they haven't done, and Israel will retaliate. And the president says, he said that today in the cabinet meeting today, that if they do not respond, then he will see to it that they are eradicated. That will not be U.S. troops, but troops on the ground, either Arab forces or even Israel Defense Forces.
Speaking of Hamas, Natalie, President Trump has suggested that Hamas leadership may not have been directly involved in the weekend violence. If that's true, what does that say about Hamas's internal control at this stage of the conflict? And could that point to a breakdown in command or rogue elements acting independently?
You know, if what the president said is true, that sort of suggests that Hamas is losing control of the Gaza Strip. Now, that being said, I doubt that Hamas didn't at least know what was going on if it wasn't directly involved in the breakdown of the ceasefire and weekend violence. Hamas, before the war and during the war, maintains a tight grip on everything that goes on in Gaza. That's militarily, politically, socially. So it's hard to believe that they also didn't have a hand in, the latest developments. At the same time, the Israelis have done an incredibly successful job over the last 2 years degrading Hamas to the point where it's basically a shell of what it was on October 6th, 2023. But I still think that what we've seen in the last couple of days at least was on Hamas's radar if Hamas wasn't involved in it directly. And
Natalie, while I have you, to something that Kelly just mentioned, Trump had threatened to eradicate Hamas if it breaks the ceasefire deal. We know that he's said that troops won't be in the ground or on the ground in Gaza, but could you envision any type of scenario where U.S. troops do get involved in Gaza?
So I don't think at this point U.S. troops will or should get involved on the ground in Gaza. At the end of the day, this is Israel's war. Now, Israel is fighting that war on behalf of not only itself, but on behalf of America, the broader Western world, the other countries whose citizens were killed or taken hostage on October 7th. But even if American boots aren't going on the ground, I do think that what we need right now from the Trump administration is unwavering support for Israel to continue its battle against Hamas should Hamas break this current ceasefire.
Kelly, I want to move to another conflict zone. President Trump is signaling a shift in support for Ukraine following what's reported to have been a tense meeting with Zelensky last Friday. What more can you tell us about this?
You know, it's very difficult to explain exactly what's going on in the mind of President Donald Trump as it relates to Ukraine. We do know that his wife, the First Lady, has been dealing directly with Putin and getting some of those children, Ukrainian children in Russian custody, released. 8 of 50,000 have been returned so far. But here's the deal right now. That meeting that he had with Zelensky on Friday, apparently once the cameras left the room and the press left the room, it turned sideways, and Zelensky left very disappointed. We also understand that, again, in that cabinet meeting room today when the president was meeting with the Australian president, the president was asked what did he say to Vladimir Putin of Russia last Thursday on that phone call ahead of Zelensky's visit. And the president actually told Putin to stop attacking civilians on the ground in Ukraine. Also, there are reports that Zelensky and Trump are actually trying to figure out a deal on those Tomahawk missiles. The president, again, not committing to that. Zelensky believes that would be very important to have the use of those Tomahawk missiles to bring Putin to the table. We do know that based on the conversation that the president had with Zelensky, we do not know if Zelensky will be meeting in Budapest, Hungary next week or the week after that when the president sits down with Vladimir Putin for a second time and trying to broker a deal. But things remain very up in the air and very unclear and murky in trying to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia at this time.
Accomplishing peace is no easy task. Kelly Wright for CBN and Natalie Ecanow with Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.